Hello and welcome along to another episode of My Football Story from the Honest Football Podcast. This week, Charlie sits down with current Ballymena United captain Jim Ervin to discuss his illustrious career in the game. It's a career that includes incredible perseverance and determination. After a youth career moving over to England with Nottingham Forest, Jim returned back to Northern Ireland and was part of a Linfield team that became serial winners. We talk about that mentality, being involved in one of the most successful spells for any club in modern Irish League history, as well as moving on to Ballymena and a continuation of a successful career. We also talk about youth international honours, and Jim's incredibly honest throughout about his experiences in the game. He's had a brilliant career so far and joined us in the middle of a very busy week. He played for Ballymena just the night before this was recorded, so we can't thank Jim enough for giving up time out of his schedule. If you do enjoy the episode, please do put a thumbs up on it. But this is Jim Ervin's football story, and we hope you enjoy it.
And I'm delighted to say that Jim's joined me now. Jim, I appreciate obviously a busy week. You had a game last night, etc. So I really appreciate you giving it the time to join us today. So thank you very much for that.
Not a problem. It's good to be on.
So what we do before, you've had an incredibly successful career and obviously still playing now. And we're going to cover all of that in the interview. But what we like to do with every guest that we have is actually go back to your first football memory. So if you could just tell us about the first ever memory of football you have, whether it be playing, watching, any of that, really sort of take us back there, please.
The first game I can remember watching probably would have been, I think it might have been about the 1992 FA Cup final. I think Liverpool played Sunderland.
Yeah.
But on the same day, the Scottish Cup final was on, and I think Rangers played Airdrie. My family were mad Rangers supporters, and my dad had a lot of his friends around at the house, and sort of two TVs going, the Liverpool on, the same Liverpool Cup final on, the Glasgow Rangers Cup final on, and the house being full of supporters of both teams watching both games. And that was really the first memory I have of a football game that always stuck out for me.
And do you remember the first one you actually went to live, like the whole sort of being in the ground and the atmosphere and all of that went with it?
No, I don't remember what the first game would have been, but my dad always showed me photographs. As I said, my family were all mad Glasgow Rangers fans, and my dad used to be a season ticket holder, and the support in Belfast that Rangers have, they went back and forward every other week to the home games. So I'd have been 1 year old at the time, and there were photographs of me as a child, the scarf wrapped around me and going with the colours on, and photographs of various players outside the ground. So I was at live games from a very young age, but what game, I can't actually remember what the first game was, to be honest.
I've got to be honest, I've been to Ibrox probably about half a dozen times, and it easily hands down the best place I've ever watched a live football match. You know yourself obviously a lot more than me, but just the whole day, the atmosphere around the whole ground, and that's just incredible, isn't it? Amazing.
Oh, it's fantastic. And luckily enough, I went with my father, and I've been able to take my own son along with my dad. So the three generations of us being there, and we try to get there as best as we can, but we're still playing. It's quite difficult, obviously, with playing hands.
Yeah, no, of course, absolutely. And I suppose, you probably played against them yourself, haven't you, a few times, in that sense?
Yeah, I played against them a few times. And the best thing about it was that when we're at Linfield, I'm sure we'll cover later on, that whenever Rangers went into financial trouble, Linfield invited Rangers over across to Belfast to help them out with gate receipts and etc. And Rangers repaid the due and brought us over to Ibrox, which was a dream come true for me and a lot of the other players in the team at the time to play in the hallowed turf of Ibrox. Unfortunately for us, it was like a Wednesday night game, and it was like a 7 o'clock kickoff. So for us to play in front of 15,000 people was fantastic. But if it had been a weekend, you might have got 40, 50,000 there, which would have been unbelievable for us.
So what I wanted to ask you about before we got into obviously, maybe your more serious and then your professional career and all of that is actually at school. So, we speak to some pros, and some pros are head and shoulders above their classmates at school, and others, maybe it's just a bit of a later sort of development. So what were you like at school in terms of as a footballer? Were you the best in the year group?
In school, it was sort of my group of friends were a lot older than me from the area that I lived in. So you don't see it nowadays, but street football was the thing. You went to school and you come home and you got a crowd of mates, whether it be 15, 20 of you, and you played a mass match, in the middle of the street and bumping into cars and hitting wing mirrors, which you don't see nowadays. So I played with a lot of an older group. First football game that I can ever remember would have been played for the P7 team, obviously Primary 7, which was a year above me. And there was me and another boy called Gary Kincaid, who was a goalkeeper, who was absolutely fantastic. And both me and him played from P6 a year up into the P7 team. And it was quite strange because you wouldn't see it nowadays as well. Kids are quite lucky. They've got the 3G pitches. But we played on an old gravel pitch. You know, we would have played with the footballs that had the dimples on the ends of them, and if you hit it with it, the mark stayed in your leg for a couple of hours. So primary six would have been the first sort of football game that I got involved in. And there was a guy that came about. There was a local team called St Andrews Boys Club, which was very, very famous for boys going across the water. Keith Gillespie, Warren Feeney, Lee Feeney, Darren Fitzgerald, Paul McKnight, boys like that all played. Grant McCann that played for St Andrews and then ended up going across the water. And he came to the game and scouted me and the goalkeeper to come along, but we were too young to join the actual starting team. So we went and trained for 2 years before our age group had came along, and I managed to stay there for a long period of time and played with some great players. Steve Davis, who's the Northern Ireland captain, was a part of our team for many years, you know, so there were some fantastic players to come through our boys club.
Yeah, so obviously you mentioned about that, and I think, you know, the whole reputation, even sort of doing research for this, you know, about St Andrews, and quite a few lads have gone on to professional clubs, and in your case, you went to Nottingham Forest. So how did that sort of come about? And I suppose, obviously, you know, you're a very talented footballer. Were there other places you could have gone over the water as well in that sense, or?
The first time I came across it, I think it may have been about third form in secondary school, and there was a guy, Michael Whitley, who was the Nottingham Forest scout for Northern Ireland. He had given my mum and dad a call, obviously, and said that they would like to take me across for a trial. He had been watching me in the local team at St Andrews. And I went across with another couple of boys, Wayne Larmer, who went across and signed, Craig McLean, who also signed, and Darren Munster. So there was 4 of us that went across one Easter time. It was absolutely fantastic. It was totally different to what I was used to. You know, we were used to training for 1 hour on a Tuesday night and played a match on a Saturday. So to go into an environment where you were training every day, you know, the fitness levels were totally different, something that I'd never experienced before. And the playing ability was so much higher than what we were used to. So it was quite difficult, you know, for the first week that I was there. And I came back and I never heard anything else back. So I always thought to myself, you know, the chance is gone, I'll never hear anything. And exactly a year later, the following Easter, I was asked to go back across again. Something similar, went across, and a really difficult week. Again, such a big step up to what we were used to. And that was it. So I hadn't heard anything back. It was sort of 2 years in a row, went away at Easter time, didn't hear anything. And you kind of thought, no, your chance is gone. That was the only thing he ever wanted to do, was to be a professional footballer. And when you get into sort of 5th form in school, you need to start thinking, what am I going to do beyond school? The only thing I ever wanted to do was to be a professional footballer, but it kind of hit home that the reality being this may never happen. You know, it's getting more and more unlikely as the years were going on. I ended up going on trial to Sunderland, and it was a brilliant experience. They were in the Premiership at the time, and it was a fantastic week. I didn't hear anything back from them, but at Easter time, I went back across to Nottingham Forest for the 3rd year running. I just went and gave it my absolute everything. As I come home through the front door, my mum and dad were sitting, and my mum started crying. You automatically think something's wrong.
Of course.
And my dad just says, listen, we've got a phone call from Nottingham Forest. They would like you to go back across. And I said, oh, brilliant, fantastic. You know, 3 years in a row, and, you know, this is the first time I've heard something back. I said, brilliant, when can I go back across? And he says, well, they're looking you to move over in the summer. They've offered you a 3-year deal. And I thought this was brilliant. You know, it's the only thing I ever wanted to do as a child. So to be offered a contract, it was absolutely fantastic. So again, the other boys that I'd been across with, so there was 4 of us had all been offered a deal, which was good too, because it would have been a bedding in period. You would have knew people there. It would have been easier to settle in. They'd have knew the boys. We'd all come through the same boys club. So it was good to have that company there. So, you know, the rest was kind of history. We went across, mum and dad, and had a look around the facilities and different bits and pieces to make sure they were happy with things. And after that, I signed a 3-year deal and moved across in the summer of 2001.
That's incredible. And I think just for me, that highlights, you know, to obviously to make it like you have, it's not just about the ability, is it? It's that determination and that resilience, I suppose. Because, I imagine a lot of lads would have not crumbled, that's the wrong word, but, you know, those knockbacks would have hit them hard, and, you know, maybe the following invite, they might not have gone again. So
it was incredible, you know, and that's what I'm saying, to go away sort of 3 years, every year at Easter time, and for 2 years, I didn't hear anything back. And you're kind of thinking, oh, you know, they've seen somebody else, or, you know, you're just not up to it. And that's the way football is. You know, sometimes it's hard to deal with, and sometimes you just got to get on with it. And thankfully, I was asked back for the 3rd time, and I managed to make an impression, which then got me the offer of the contract.
Yeah. So obviously, I mean, Nottingham Forest, it's a massive institution, is it? So much history there and all of that. But just before we go into the sort of nuts and bolts of that quickly, when you went over, you know, once you signed your 3-year deal, if you don't mind me asking a slightly personal question, did you feel homesick at all? Because I've spoken to a couple of lads who've gone over, and actually some of them have found it really difficult, and others, have relished it and just sort of grabbed it with both hands in that sense.
I never ever felt homesick. There was times of the year that you maybe felt a wee bit down if your friends were giving you a call and they were all together and you were in the digs. And the digs at Nottingham Forest was quite strict. You had curfews and you were sort of you had to be in your digs for a certain time. You had to be in your room for a certain time. I never got homesick, and I think that was partly the reason for that was there were so many boys from Belfast, and there was 4 of us come over. The 4 of us all knew each other because we played in the same boys' club, and the 4 of us had been going back and forward to Nottingham Forest for several years. So we'd got that bit of bond, and we had that wee bit of friendship that managed that if any of us were ever feeling down, we had each other to fall back on. So I think we were quite lucky that way.
But that obviously maybe helps you to sort of bed in, and maybe I think what we don't understand as fans from the outside is, when you see a performance on a Saturday, whether it's in the first team or under 18s, etc. It's a lot more than just the football, isn't it? In your sense, I suppose you had people around you, but some lads, it's not. It doesn't always work out, and part of that maybe is off the pitch stuff, isn't it? In that sense.
Yeah, and the thing is, we were quite lucky that there was a bond between sort of we were called the foreign boys as such, because any of the English guys or Welsh guys that were involved in the digs, they were able to go home after the games at the weekend. So we had a game on a Saturday morning, and they were able to go home Saturday afternoon and come back in Sunday evening. Where the boys sort of from Scotland, Northern Ireland, we all had to stay in the digs, and we were there. Sometimes there might have only been 4 of you, sometimes there might have been 5, just depending on which weekend it was. So it could have got quite lonely. And as I say, for the fact that there was 4 of us went away, we were quite lucky that we had each other at the weekends. Where maybe for my instance, if I had been away on my own, there maybe would have only been 2 or 3 in the digs, and then it might have been a bit more lonely. The fact that we had each other to, whether it be to go to cinema or go into the Nottingham City Centre, we had that company and we had that friendship from back home. That you always knew you could rely on each other.
In that sense of then playing at obviously a professional club, but more so when you're with the sort of younger lads initially, how does it affect your performance? I mean, I suppose you're trying to get a contract or get a place in the first team, but you're having to play as part of a team on a Saturday. Like, what's that mentality like? Do you have to be a little bit selfish more so than what you maybe would do when you're playing in the first team?
It's quite strange when you're looking back on it now, and people would say, how did you find your 3 years? Did you have any? In the long term, no regrets of the 3 years that it was there and how things went. But when you look back, you kind of think you would approach things differently. The 4 boys from Belfast, we had quite a strong bond, and back then, the way the pyramid system worked was you're under 17s, under 19s, then reserves. Obviously, for any under 17 player to go and play for the 19s, it was huge. Any 19s player to be called up for the reserves, it was huge. And in our eyes, anyway, coming from Belfast over to England, that was a big deal for us. And there was a couple of times that we maybe went and you got promoted in to play for the under 19s or in the under 19 squad. And for me, whenever it was in my behalf and the other 3 boys hadn't, you kind of felt, how come they haven't got up? In the back of your head, you were going, I would have liked them to come up. That's where you kind of got to be selfish and go, no, this is my opportunity, and I'm going to take it with both hands, and I'm going to try and push myself. But sometimes in the back of your head, you felt for those boys because you're like, we're so close, and I've got an opportunity to go with the 19s here and travel. How come they haven't? Or it might have been the same even with when boys went up to play on the bench or be on the bench for the reserves, and you automatically thought of them instead of thinking how lucky you were and this was your chance to grasp your opportunity if it was given to you. So in that aspect of things, me personally, I would have looked at that differently and probably tried to have been more selfish and thought about myself rather than the boys that I was so close with.
Yeah, I think I think you bang on in that sense of, I suppose it's so cutthroat, isn't it, really? And if you don't take the opportunity, there's probably lots of other lads who would. Just on the football side of it, obviously you mentioned about maybe going from the 19s to the reserves as an example, and then you train with the more senior pros. What's the difference football-wise in terms of physicality, the speed? Is it the same? How does it sort of compare?
For me, it was any time we went and trained with the first team. Paul Hart was absolutely fantastic. When he was obviously the academy director at the time we moved across, and he took over from David Platt. I think might have been early August time, sort of 2001. So we didn't get a lot of time with Paul Hart at the youth level. But the one thing about him, because he had done so well at youth level with Leeds United and Nottingham Forest, he always had that structure where he wanted youth team players around the senior setup, and the amount of players that he brought through at Nottingham Forest, the first team level was absolutely fantastic. So he would have got the under-17s or under-19s down with the first team on a Friday doing shape for them.
Right.
So you always thought this was your chance to try and impress.
Yeah.
At the same time, it was quite daunting, because you're a 17-year-old and you're up against maybe Marlon Herwood, who's an absolute, and Ricky Shimmick and different Jim Brennan, different people like that, Andy Reid. It's quite daunting and at times it's petrifying. But that was your time to shine. That was your time to put something into Paul Hart's mind, and many youth team players were able to do that and were able to cope with it better than others. And those that were able to cope with it better than others, they were the ones that then took that step and Paul gave them that opportunity, whether it be to train with them day in, day out, or bring them back and forward during the week, or else kick on for the first team itself.
It's fascinating to hear that, really, because I suppose from people that are on the outside, you don't necessarily get to see and hear about that. So I think I appreciate being so honest about that in that sense. So in terms of Forest, you mentioned maybe about not having regrets, but eventually, sadly, the time at Forest came to an end. What was your next move after that? Because obviously Forest has such an amazing reputation for its academy and, producing good players and that. And, your next move ended up being to Linfield. But was there a period in between where you maybe could have stayed in England, or was it a case of wanting to sort of maybe go back over the water?
No, I never wanted to come home. I was always very headstrong that, if things didn't work out at Nottingham Forest, I didn't want to come home. So I tried my best, and like any young fella, I think at the time at Nottingham Forest, there was about, say, 12, 13 players at our age group. 10 of us were let go, were released probably about February, March time. And there was only 3 boys kept on. And I can remember the 3 boys kept on. Craig Westcar was one, Tom Groves and James Biggins, 3 English internationals at their age group. Yeah. 3 very, very good players. They were the only 3 to get contracts. So there was 10 of us let go. And obviously, you know what it's like, along with maybe 50, 60 other boys maybe more throughout the country had been released. So you're fighting amongst all different clubs to try and get trials here, there and everywhere. And I went to Sheffield Wednesday for a week. It didn't work out. I played a trial game for Chesterfield. It didn't work out. I had a trial arranged for Bournemouth for a week that was arranged, and I travelled down there, trained for 2 days, played a friendly game against Yeovil, and 20 minutes into the game, went in for a 50-50 tackle and came out with torn ankle ligaments. So that kind of knocked me for 6. Again, then after that, it was just back to Nottingham Forest and got rehab. And I can remember the Easter time that year, youth team was allowed to go home. And I actually stayed in Nottingham for treatment instead of coming home because I wanted to get myself fit. I was still heavily involved in the Northern Ireland youth setup at under-19s. Yeah. And whenever I got the news that I was released at Nottingham Forest, I kind of thought that was my chance to try and impress maybe clubs that were maybe watching the international games. And that was my main focus then, was to try and get fit and try and perform for there. And, you know, there's obviously the Milk Cup in Northern Ireland's a massive tournament. And I played for Northern Ireland at the under-19s elite section, again, in the hope that I could possibly get a move. And after that, I'd actually, ironically, got a week's trial at Yeovil Town, who had torn my ankle ligaments. So I'd spent the week there, and unfortunately, it didn't work out. I was told that there was nothing going to be offered to me, and I'd got to the stage that was maybe early August time, so I knew the league campaign was going to be starting, and I kind of thought, well, you know, I don't want to be hanging about, travelling from club to club between August to Christmas and trying to get something. So I come home. I came back home to Northern Ireland and I had 2 choices, Ballymena United or else Linfield. And, you know, coming from Belfast, Linfield was a massive team in the country, the biggest team in Northern Ireland and Ireland. And it was a dream come true for me to sign for them because they were a team I supported all my life.
Of course. I
used to go and watch them as a young boy, and any time I was home from England, I would have went to their games. So for me to be given the opportunity to play for them was absolutely fantastic. And, you know, that was my next move really in football.
You mentioned about your international career, but I'm going to pause that and we'll come back to that a bit later on because I wanted to compare it to obviously the next part, which was Linfield. And that's where, you know, I love the Irish League. It's so honest. It's so a brilliant entertainment. And I just, you know, it's everything I think football should be. But in terms of going back from full-time football to the Irish League, obviously as great as it is, I suppose at the time as well, it was part-time football. How did that work out for you? How did you find that transition? And obviously, especially a club like Linfield, which is such a massive institution, as you say, in the country.
Yeah, the difficulty coming home, I think, for any young lads at my age, sort of turning 19, 20 years of age, I think what a lot of young lads that go across the water, the money they get and the wages they get at youth teams, sort of, whether you're saying a pro contract, it's really good money for the age you are. And you think that when you're getting that money at maybe 17, 18, 19 years of age, that when you come home to join an Irish League club, certainly it has changed even from I joined the Irish League to nowadays. There's teams now going full time. And
Yeah.
But Linfield were the biggest team in the country, you know, and I think when people were sort of knew they were interested in you, they always thought that they were going to get a big paycheck. And that was never ever the case. And I was actually on more money at Nottingham Forest than what I was ever offered at Linfield. For them, it's to be the biggest team in the country. A lot of people think you're going to get big money. And I can remember speaking to the manager and the assistant manager, and they says, you know, the money here will be okay, but the reality is when you're back in the Irish League playing football, if you need to live, if you're living at home, you're maybe okay, you can live off it if you're living with your parents. But if you've got your own place, you needed to go and get a day job.
Yeah.
You know, and that was the hardest thing for me, was realising, you know, the football's part-time, albeit Linfield trained 3 evenings a week.
Wow.
So we trained Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and then you had a game on a Saturday. So it was one day off from being full-time, realistically. But on top of that, you had to get a day job. So you weren't working maybe 9 to 5, training on a Monday night from 6:15 to 8:15, 8:30, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. Then you were working Wednesday, Friday. You were shattered by the weekend, because this was a culture shock for me, that you've been full-time football, training day in, day out, you know, and then playing a game on a Saturday. So it was a big culture shock for me, and big shock to the system. But when I came back, I really enjoyed it. And, you know, the training the 3 nights a week suited me down to the ground for the training that we had been used to. But then when you start getting into the comfort of it, you realise how difficult it is. And it starts to get a bit tiring, sort of Christmas time onwards.
I was about to say, I imagine there are periods in the year where I suppose it all stacks up. My next question was going to be, did you feel like your fitness suffered? Because I've spoken to other people who've come back and maybe haven't trained anywhere near as often as you have, but I suppose you were borderline full-time, so I suppose there wasn't much difference in that sense, was there, really?
No, but fitness-wise, I always felt well, fitness-wise. You know, I always felt that. I think a lot of people coming back from England too, England's more technical, and, you know, it's a lot quicker, but it's all technical side of football. When you come back to the Irish League, it's a bit more blood and thunder, and, you know, it's getting into 50-50 tackles, getting in each other's face, you know, and the physical aspect of it. I think a lot of players struggle with when they come back from England or Scotland, you know, that's the real struggle they have. And a lot of people find that if their attitude's not right, within a year or two down the line, they're not even playing Irish League football. They just fall away completely, because it's something they've not been used to, and maybe attitudes towards it have been different, and they've just fell out of love.
Going back to what you were saying about that, I suppose that professionalism of Linfield in the sense of the way the club was run, and although you were obviously training nearly every day, I suppose it paid off, because the period then you had at Linfield was incredibly successful, and we could probably do a whole episode on just those sort of years you were there. But one bit I sort of wanted to talk to you about was you had like the time, I think it was 6 doubles in 7 years. But there was one season where you'd done the clean sweep. So we'll go back on sort of the Linfield big picture in a minute. But you're the only sort of pro we've ever spoken to, or player we've spoken to who's ever done that. So I just wanted to know, to begin with, in terms of the dressing room, what made that different from maybe, you know, the previous years that you played at Linfield, in terms of maybe the dynamics, the manager, all of that? What was it that made that work, really, that come off?
I was quite lucky, because that was my second year at Linfield. You know, when I came home from England and at Nottingham Forest, I'd signed a 2-year deal with Linfield. The first year, I sort of played the first 7 games, and then I got a wee niggle, and then I struggled to come back from it. The team were doing well, so I just struggled to get into the team. That was a real learning curve for me, because I just come back and hit the ground running. I took a knock, struggled getting back from it. Then I struggled getting into the team. And for that full year, it was just, you were in and out, maybe the odd game here, the odd game there. And it was really probably a year to forget footballing ways. And I can remember going away at the end of that first year and thinking to myself, right, I need to knuckle down, I need to do stuff away. And I can remember I went and joined the boxing club just to do 2 nights a week, 3 nights a week, different training, different aspects of fitness. And I got myself in really good condition for coming back for the following year. At the end of that first year, we had lost the league to our bitter rivals, Glentoran, on the second game before the end of the season. And I can remember the feeling in the changing room after the game, and in the training nights after that. And we were absolutely devastated to lose the league away from home to your bitter rivals. It was hard to take, but that kind of kicked us on, because we were then in the St Panta Cup final about a month later, and we were away to Shelburne, who were absolutely huge favourites. They'd just competed in the Champions League. I think they played Deportivo or something, the Champions League, the previous season, you know, and they'd went really close. So no one had given us a cat's hell chance, you know, of going to Dublin and winning. And I was left out of the squad that night, but it was a part of the team that travelled to Dublin, and it was just one of the best performances I've ever witnessed and ever seen. You know, and we went down and we beat them 2-0, and it was absolutely fantastic. And that kick-started us for the following year. And I can remember getting in for the pre-season, and the boys were absolutely flying. We went into the Europa League then at the time, and we had played feature spells from Latvia, and we actually progressed on away goals. We were the first team in Northern Ireland to progress in something like 10 years through a European qualifying round, and it was fantastic. You know, the camaraderie away the European trip, and the boys being together and to go through the experience that, I would say, just turned 20, so the experience that was absolutely fantastic at such a young age. Unfortunately, we went out in the following round, the Halmstads. I think we lost 5-3 on aggregate, you know, over the two legs, which was a great achievement as well. But rather than letting it get us down, we actually hit the league campaign, and I can remember that season. It was sort of surreal because you sort of knew within the first 10 minutes that you were going to win.
Right.
We'd hit teams that year for 4-0 up maybe after 20 minutes, 3-0 up after 15. And it was just one of those games. You'd steamrolled teams so much. And I can remember it being said that we were the first team to go 3 nights a week, and this extra night's training was telling us all, you know, and fitness levels were through the roof. So that winning becomes a habit, you know, and winning the Santanta Cup at the tail end of the previous season just kick-started us, and we went on and we won the League Cup, we won the league, and then we got revenge back on our bitter rivals when we beat them in the Irish Cup final to win the clean sweep, you know, and that was fantastic achievement, and it just sort of set things off for the following years to come.
Well, that was going to be my next question, Jim, if you don't mind me sort of asking, is once you've won everything, I suppose, where do you go from there? Once you're at the very top of everything that you could win, I suppose it shows the testament to the team, but what was it difficult to come back almost in a weird way after, you know, a year like that, to come back for pre-season, having won literally everything there was to win in a weird way?
It wasn't, no, because that's what I'm saying. The changing room we had then, I've never been involved in a changing room like it. What we had at that time of doing the clean sweep, and even the teams 6 doubles in 7 years, you know, the boss David Jeffrey every year always had every couple of years he ended up having to build a new team because boys were getting too old and they were retiring, or he always loved to freshen things up, which I think kept everybody on their toes, and it kept everybody that hungry, you know, that bit of hunger that you need to succeed. And it was a case of, as silly as it sounds, and maybe looking back on it now, maybe a wee bit naive, but after you'd win the trophy, you enjoyed yourself that night. Once that night was finished, it was forgot about. It was like, when's the next one? So you enjoyed it for that night, but looking back on it now, what we achieved, I don't think it was really appreciated back at the time, you know, and we didn't enjoy it as much as we possibly should have been, because it was just, right, that's over with. When's the next one? Where's the next one? Right, we'll knock that down. And then after sort of the 6 doubles in 7 years, we kind of tailed off, and we didn't win a trophy for so many years, and it kind of became, right, okay, now we should appreciate what we actually achieved. But Linfield was such a big club that if you go a year without winning a trophy, it's a failure, you know, and the fans and the club demand so much from you. And unfortunately, that team then broke away, and they had to then rebuild again.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating to hear that, because, you know, you're the only player we've ever spoke to who's ever achieved that. So I think it's fascinating to hear that maybe the fact you didn't appreciate it so much at the time is maybe why you went and won the next one. I suppose if you had stopped to take stock of it, you know, it's quite an interesting sort of, it'd be interesting to see if it had gone a different way maybe. But you mentioned about obviously playing in Europe when you're at Linfield, and then later on obviously actually captain in Ballymena in Europe as well. Is there a difference in styles of play in terms of that? Especially being, you know, when you're at Linfield, you've won the leagues, the cups, etc. Is it a bit slower? Is it a bit more technical? You know, what is the sort of difference there?
No, but whenever you get to Europe, it's a lot more quicker. It's similar to the experience that I had from under 17s at Nottingham Forest when you go and train with the first team. You know, the levels are that, you know, and for Irish League teams to go away, and it was never heard of Irish League teams to go in Europe and actually compete. You know, you'd have maybe, over the 2 legs, you'd have maybe got a 0-0 or a 1-0 defeat in the first leg, and then you'd get thrashed in the second leg with 4-0, 7-1, whatever it may be. You know, it was quite difficult to take, because you're going from that environment where the Irish League, you're playing against boys, it's the same routine as you, working. To give you, you know, a bit of a laugh about it, we were playing a game at Windsor Park. I remember playing Bate Borisov.
Yeah.
And I think we beat them 1-0. And the harsh side of it is, the vast majority of our team were working 9 to 5. You then had to report to the ground at 6:15,
Right.
in preparation for a Europa League qualifier against Bate Borisov, and you're thinking these boys have played against Barcelona, AC Milan,
Exactly.
teams like that, and we've beat them 1-0 at Windsor Park. We've done a day's work, and then we've went out to play a game of football. We went away to Bate Borisov, and I think we lost 3-0.
Right.
We were maybe 3-0 down after 15 minutes, and I can remember that game, the heat out there just absolutely exhausted everybody by half time, and we were a credit to ourselves that we managed to stay in the game at 2-0 or 3-0, I think it was, and lose sort of a respectable, aggregate score. But that was the harsh reality. The home games, you were working during the day and playing a game that evening.
I've always found it fascinating when Irish League teams get into Europe, because, like you say, I suppose I don't know what it must be, your thoughts must be during that day at work. Can you concentrate on what you're doing? And then if you do, like you win when, like you said, 1-0 against Bate Borisov, the next day at work, it must be so bizarre in a weird way that you think you're playing against this team last night and then you're back in doing your 9 to 5 again. It's so strange, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's the thing, because you're doing that work sort of during the day, so your preparation for the game isn't normal preparation, because you're running about and you're in a day's work. Depending on how busy you are, you're maybe trying to eat at certain times. You're making sure you're taking the right fluids and trying to get enough fluids on board. Then if you're in work, you're running back and forward to the toilet because you're trying to get as much fluids on to keep yourself hydrated. And then when you're on such a high from the European game that night, you get home, you can't sleep because the adrenaline is running through you. You're maybe up at 7 o'clock the next morning to get yourself ready for work, and you're like a zombie the next day. And you hit 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock that following evening, you've just hit a complete brick wall, and you just want to get to your bed.
I can imagine, actually. Yeah, I can only imagine what that must be like. But yeah, I suppose it's fascinating to hear that. I really appreciate you sort of talking about that. But I want to go back a few years in the sense of you mentioned about representing, obviously, your country, and I imagine an incredibly proud moment for you. But the reason I wanted to leave it till now was, obviously, you achieved so much as a player at Linfield and a club that you supported as a kid. And I don't want to put you in an awkward position, but how does playing for your country rank against what you achieved as a player sort of domestically, if that makes sense?
For me, as a kid growing up, the only thing I wanted to do was be a professional footballer, and the two clubs that I wanted to play for were Glasgow Rangers and Linfield, who were my team that, Northern Ireland were never the big international team as such. Unfortunately, we're such a small nation. We through such a bad time. And I can remember the Northern Ireland schoolboys at under 15s. It was actually my school teacher took the team, John McCabe.
Right.
And I made it to the last trials, and then it was left out. I took it so bad, and I took it so personal, and I think for a couple of days in school, I wouldn't talk to him and just ignored him. It was a big thing to play schoolboy football.
Of course.
At that age, to try and play in the Victory Shield. And I can always remember, I thought to myself, it can go two ways. I can let this affect me, or I can show him that I should have been in his team as such, and I can't say anything because his team then went on to win the Victory Shield that year, so I had no complaints about getting into the team. But I always used it as determination that if and when the Northern Ireland under-17 setup came along, that I would do my best to get into it and I would do everything I can. And Kenny Shields was the under-17 manager at the time for Northern Ireland, and I can remember getting picked, and I think we had played 2 games against Scotland, and then we were fortunate enough we went on to play Russia and Germany in European qualifiers. Never knew what to expect going to play for them, and I knew all the boys that were in the setup just through different trials coming through the years. And I can remember the feeling I got that night standing for the national anthems was just amazing, and it was then something that you went, it was a huge deal that you were representing your country, albeit it was at under 17 level. But when you're that age at under 17s, it's the be all and end all that you're representing your country. Yes, your club football is your bread and butter, and that's where you get your rewards. But to represent your country at any level, whether it be under 17s, 19s, and 21s, as I was lucky enough to do, it was a privilege every time, and it was something that I look back on with great pride.
Did you ever think, was there ever a chance of even being in and around the sort of senior squad, or in that sense, obviously, from the progression from the 21s? Or
No, never. I can remember being involved in the first under-21 game, was against Switzerland, and guys like Pat McCourt, Michael McGovern, Stephen Davis, Sammy Morrow, who was at Ipswich at the time, Dean Shields at Arsenal, who went on to Hibs and Kilmarnock and stuff, and playing alongside those boys was absolutely fantastic, and it was such a big lift for me, to be playing under 21s football. And I was hoping to kick on then. And I can remember at the time, Northern Ireland, the IFA were going through a lot of financial difficulties. And they actually pulled their under 21 squad out of the European qualifying campaign to try and save money, because we weren't a big nation and the senior team weren't going so well at the time. So under 21 football was quite limited, just the friendly games here and there. And they were few and far between, to be honest with you. So I kind of think I had two caps at under 21 level, and unfortunately didn't get any more, and unfortunately then there was never ever a chance of going anywhere towards the seniors.
No, it's still an incredible achievement and the aspiration of so many footballers. So I'm incredibly jealous of you, obviously, to do that. But the only thing I can relate to with you, though, is injuries in that sense. So I just wanted to ask you about your psychology when that's happening. Sort of, how do you cope with that? Because it happens quite a bit.
It's very, very difficult. I can remember the first time at Linfield we were playing Glentoran. And it was a big game. I think it was towards the end of the season, maybe 4 or 5 games left before the end of the season. And if we beat Glentoran that day, we were going to win the league. So it was a huge game, big turnout. And I can remember the ball, one of the Glentoran, it was actually a Glentoran right back, had bombed up the line and cut inside, and I went to tackle him. But I got my studs caught in the ground, and at the time I thought I broke my leg, and it turned out that I'd ruptured my cruciate ligament, and I had to get total knee reconstruction. So it was quite difficult. I didn't know what to expect. I was quite fortunate that there was 2 boys in the Linfield team at the time who had previously done theirs. Right. And I was able to recall on them, to get a bit of advice of how you go about the rehab. And the one thing I have to say, Linfield were absolutely fantastic with me, getting me through the operation and putting me through the rehab with Terry Hayes, the physiotherapist at the time. And he was the Northern Ireland physio, for the senior team. So I was good, capable hands, and he knew what he was doing. And he kept me on the right track and never ever let me get too far ahead of where I was, and kept my feet in the ground. Psychologically, it was very difficult because I was then out of work because of the injury. I was at home, so you're not in the routine of going out to work, and I was at home alone, and you've all sorts of thoughts going through your head. Of the way I always looked at it was Paul Gascoigne was always the one I can remember doing it.
Yeah,
I can always remember people saying that he was never the same player after doing his cricket. Although he was, in my eyes, he was exceptional from the time that I can remember him. But previous to his injury at Tottenham, by all means, he was absolutely world class. And that was the biggest fear for me. That people were always saying he was never the same player. And you're thinking to yourself, how are you going to cope? Are you ever going to get back to full fitness? Are you ever going to be brave enough to go in for another 50-50 tackle? Or will this hinder you? So I had 9 months out, and I'd done a lot of rehab, a lot of fitness work with Terry Hayes. And I can remember my first game back for the reserves. I was only ever allowed to play 45 minutes.
Right.
And it was a big thing. I got myself psyched up, at this game. And I can remember sort of thinking, what way am I going to approach this? Tackle him? Will I take it easy? And once I went over the white line, it's just complete blank, And I can remember my dad saying to me, there was about 10 minutes, 15 minutes into the game, and he just seen me absolutely running and getting in for this 50-50 tackle. And he thought, what are you doing, Jim? Don't be doing. And I just got up and bounced on. And it was probably the best thing to happen to me, because 15 minutes in, the tackle was over with. I knew it was fine, and I got up and played the game, and that was sort of me back from recovery.
It's incredible. I mean, I've only done it in one knee, but I've ruptured my cruciate, and the only reason I wanted to say that was that it's finished me off. I'm ruined now anyway. But the point I'm making is that I think you probably undersell how resilient and how determined you have to be to come back from that. I think it's so many of the lads I know who've done it similar, and we're only grassroots footballers in comparison to yourself, but it's still that principle of something that you love and you love doing. For me, it's a social thing, and not being able to do that, it really did sort of affect me. But the bit I found the hardest, I don't know about you, Jim, just quickly, was the actual doing the rehab on my own at the early stages of it, because some of it's so monotonous and so boring, isn't it? Not in a disrespectful way, but some of the exercises you get.
The first time around, I think because I didn't know what I was going to be expecting and what I was going to be doing, I was just so determined and focused. I need to get back. No matter what the physio was telling me, I was just taking it in. I was soaking it up like a sponge. It was just like, right, okay, I'll do it by the, do everything by the book. The hardest part for me was the second time I'd done it on the opposite knee. And I was at Ballymena United at the time, and again, fantastic people helping me, and the physios were, and the club were brilliant. But this time I was doing a lot more on my own. The physio was he was too busy. Ballymena weren't like Linfield at the time. We're Linfield had 2 physios, so you had one physio working with the injured players, the other looking after the boys that needed treatment. Where Ballymena was one physio, and he had to do a bit of everything. So it was kind of like, this is your schedule for tonight, go out and do it. And I can always remember looking onto the training pitch and all the boys being down, and you know what it's like, boys are training and I'm in the opposite pitch doing my own running. And I can remember feeling this is horrible. This could break you completely, and I'll never play football the same way again. And I've always played football that this could be your last ever game, so make the most of it.
You mentioned obviously about Ballymena, and unfortunately you injured your knee there, but going from then Linfield to Ballymena, obviously it must have been tough. You're at Linfield for a very long time, but could you have gone elsewhere to Ballymena at that point once it sort of become not your choice, but the choice was made that you weren't going to be at Linfield anymore? Was there other offers as well as Ballymena, or?
At that time, there wasn't. I'd entered sort of what would have been my 10th year, the start of my 10th year at Linfield, and I'd found it very frustrating from when I went back in at the pre-season. I wasn't getting a lot of game time, and I was 28 years of age at the time. I'd won everything there was to win, and I was so determined to keep winning, but I wasn't getting as much game time. I was with the reserves, and at 28, I kind of thought, I need to go and play first team football here, and without being disrespectful, I never ever thought that I would just walk into Ballymena's team or anything like that. But they were managed by an old teammate of mine, Glenn Ferguson, and I can remember at the time having a conversation with him, and I just thought, that you just know at a football club when the time's right to move on, and I just knew in my heart that I needed to do it, and rather than my heart rule my head, I always wanted to play football, and I just wanted to go and enjoy football again, because I wasn't enjoying it at that time at Linfield because I wasn't playing. So I'd made the switch to Ballymena, and from then I've never looked back. I've loved every minute of it, and as determined for Ballymena as what I was determined for Linfield, and that will never change no matter who I play for. That once I go over the white line, I'll do everything that I can to make sure that we try and get the 3 points.
Obviously, Ballymena, in terms of cups and stuff recently, it's been an incredible cup side in the last few years. I'm conscious, obviously, you being there at the minute, so I'm not going to sort of after anything divisive and stuff, but is it a very different feel when maybe the expectation at the beginning of the season for a club like Ballymena is possibly to get into the top 6 and maybe getting those European playoff spots, as opposed to Linfield, where you're really expected to win 90% of your games?
Yeah, totally. At Linfield, you're just expected to win every week, and if you don't win, if you lose 2 games on the bounce, is your crisis. And at Ballymena, there was never that. Ballymena have always been known as, they were a really good cup team, and we could never really get that consistency in the league, which was a big, big struggle for us. And we always got the cup finals and maybe lost out and maybe win the odd one at the time. And I can always remember it being, the best players played consistently well, and that was one massive thing that we wanted to try and change at Ballymena, and Glenn at the time had went and signed certain players to try and change that. Unfortunately, when he left, then David came in, who was the manager at Linfield, and he had that winning mentality. Then he just wanted everything on a consistent basis, and he managed to get that. We then get into the top 6 for the first time. We'd win the League Cup. We then managed to get into the Europa League. Again, first time in 29 years or something like that for Ballymena, and then we managed to follow that up again by helping. We finished second in the league 2 years ago. So consistently we were getting there, and then last season we kind of fell away. We finished just above the playoff relegation zone, and it was probably quite frustrating because the expectation level was then there that we would be a top, not just a top 6 team, but possibly a top 4, top 3 team because of what we had achieved the year before. And sometimes when expectation levels rise, the pressure gets to people, and we had numerous reasons why we didn't perform last year, and due to injuries and people not playing consistently well. But as I say, when you do well and there's that expectation level, there then becomes more pressure, and it's how you deal with that pressure.
What I want to sort of move on to, and I'm not trying to retire you early or anything like that, but have you ever thought about what's coming next eventually? Because I suppose you can't obviously play forever, even though you've probably got the determination to, what's next maybe eventually. I
didn't think beyond playing until probably about 3-4 years ago. I was just having a conversation with an old coach, and we were talking about what would you want to do when you finish. And football's took up so much of my life so far, and yes, I would love to stay involved. So then I looked into doing the coaching badges, and I'm on the coaching ladder at the minute. I've done the UFAB, and I'm currently enrolled on the UFA. Done the first part of that in the summer past there at the IFA. So I'm just on to get my coaching hours done between now and next year, and hopefully get on to the second part of my A licence and move up the coaching ladder, because I would love to stay involved in football, whether it be coaching or managing at any level. Although I don't want to retire anytime soon. I do know that it can't keep going on forever. And whilst I'm playing, I would prefer to have the coaching badges there, that they can move straight into it rather than have a couple of years break and build up those coaching badges before you can get involved.
Jim, I've taken up so much of your evening, but we just finish off normally with some quick fire questions. You've probably been asked these a few times, but first of all, your favourite ground that you've ever played at?
Favourite ground I've ever played at would have to be Ibrox.
Yeah.
Glasgow Rangers. You know, as a boy to go on and sitting in the stands watching your boyhood heroes, you know, to then go on and playing against them and getting to meet my all-time hero, Ali McCoy, was the manager at the time, and just inside the grounds, absolutely fantastic as a supporter, but to be on the pitch as a player was something that I'll never forget and something I'll cherish for the rest of my life.
In terms of that, obviously you've played for some fantastic teams and played against some fantastic teams. Who's the best player you've played with, and then the best player you've played against?
Best player I've played with, I would have to say the current Northern Ireland captain, Stephen Davis. You just knew he was going to be a standout player, and I can remember Joe Kincaid at St Andrews always saying, "This boy will go on and captain his country." You know, and that's Joe Kincaid saying that at the 14-year-old at the time. So for that to come true, it showed what he had spotted, and it stood out an absolute mile. Best player played against. There's been quite a few locally, to be honest with you, but I can remember playing against Derry City, and Pat McCourt was absolutely frightening. The skills that guy had was absolutely scary, and he was just fantastic. And
then the very last question that we always ask is, so this is a series of, before we started speaking to professionals, was just speaking to fans about their favourite games that they'd seen and stuff. But since we started speaking to professionals, we sort of ask you two favourite games. So your favourite game as a player, and then your favourite game that you've ever watched. So you might not be, it might have been on the TV, it might have been at the ground, but so, you know, whichever order you want to do that in.
Favourite game I've ever watched would have to be the day I was actually at the ground. Me and my mate at the time had went to the Ibrox, and it was the day Rangers beat Dunfermline 6-1. They could beat Kilmarnock. I think Rangers won the league that year by 1 goal. And it was a Mikel Arteta penalty in the last minute. So the euphoria around the ground that day was just incredible, you know, and obviously to win the last game of the season 6-1 and to win the league by 1 goal was absolutely incredible. So that would have to be the one to watch. One to play in for me would have to be the day that we clinched the clean sweep, beating Glentoran, your biggest rivals, in a packed out ground, and you beat them 2-1 to win the clean sweep was absolutely extraordinary. And for me, growing up as a Linfield supporter and going to those games, you know, there's no better way to do it than to beat your bitter rivals in the Irish Cup final. So that would be the best game that I've ever been involved in.
Jim, that's an incredible way to finish the interview with two fantastic games as well. And, you know, I genuinely can't thank you enough for talking to us, especially, you know, the career you've had. And I'm aware it's late on a Wednesday night and you probably want to get some sleep before the Northern Ireland game tomorrow as well. So I just want to say thank you very much and appreciate you talking to us.
Not a problem. Thanks very much.